You're listening to Welcome to Eloma, a podcast for highly ambitious dreamers who get shit done. I'm your host, Kylie Peters. This is a space where we talk about reducing financial vulnerability. One of the things you'll hear me talk a lot about is financial security or stability or freedom. Most entrepreneurs I know are seeking this in some capacity, but it can be really scary, especially with so many unknowns. And one of the biggest and sometimes, unfortunately, one of the messiest situations we might find ourselves in is when we combine our finances with a significant other. So today's guest is Rhonda Noordyk. She's the founder and CEO of the Women's Financial Wellness Center. She's a certified divorce financial analyst and is focused on helping women reduce financial vulnerability when navigating through divorce. So I'm very excited for today's conversation and excited to have Rhonda on the show. Welcome to Eloma, Rhonda.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. So tell us a little bit, how did you find yourself niching down in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I started in the financial industry in the early 2000s and really found myself gravitating toward wanting to help women. And it was, it was challenging because everybody was like, well, Rhonda, everybody needs to have a financial strategy. Everybody needs to have a financial plan. I'm like, I know, but like, I want to help the women. And, so really like everything, right? You're like, why is it that I'm gravitating toward helping them? And so you got to do some soul searching and some reflection. And ultimately it came down to, as a kid, right? I was kind of the warrior, right? I wanted there to be justice. I always wanted to fight for the underdog. And I just found that kind of following through my life. And so, in the financial industry, I had women that would come into my office and come into my events and they'd say, Rhonda, I feel like this whole process is an open purse. I'm going through divorce. I don't feel like my attorneys to call me back, or I feel like I'm trying to have a conversation with my spouse around money and they just keep telling me, you'll be fine. It'll be fine. We've got a guy, and whatever. And they found themselves being really frustrated. So fast forward, I had a close friend, probably about 10 years into the industry, that had lost her husband unexpectedly and found herself in her late 30s as a widow with 2 young kids. And probably one of the most challenging funerals I have ever been to. And what we ended up doing is so here's a young widow, and then we had a group of people that we knew that were going through divorce. And I said, why don't we just get together and do a focus group? And so we met, and 3 hours later, and who knows how many Kleenex later, I left there and I was like, there just has to be a better way for this. The women were just feeling very disempowered in a lot of different areas, and I wanted to help. So 9 years ago, I launched my company, the Women's Financial Wellness Center, and I left the financial industry really as a way I wanted to be able to create a model that was independent of financial product sales. I wanted to create a model where women could come into a space that was safe and they could ask questions and be empowered and navigate through, life's biggest challenges. And the first year, we had over 300 women that came through our doors, which was before COVID. It was before social media was even really as robust as it is now. Those were all personal invites of people that I knew that I wanted to invite to come through the center. And I don't think one person ever said this was the most ridiculous thing. That most people were like, where were you 10 years ago or 20 years ago when I was going through divorce? I really could have used help.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not only, from what I hear, an incredibly emotionally charged situation, but especially when you're splitting finances or you're trying to divide and conquer. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. So I love that you've created this space. And, unfortunately, what I hear so often is women oftentimes don't feel confident in understanding their finances. It's quote unquote something that the man does, which is what I hear from a lot of women. And it was like, nah, no, ladies, we got to understand the money. We got to understand where this comes from and how to manage it. So I'm love the fact that you're building this safe space. So outside of the fact that, you came from this financial background, you're talking about being a warrior and really helping to level the playing field. Is there anything else like that really tugged at your heartstrings to create this specific opportunity to focus on this specific area of a woman's life?
I think at the end of the day, for me, I really took some time to say, okay, what is it that what things do I love? What do I enjoy? What do I want to be doing more of? And oh, by the way, what are the things that I hate? And
Yep.
that's always a strong word, right? But we've done
Real.
this exercises and it's real. And
Yeah.
I hate abuse. Hate it.
Yep.
And I'm sure that there are people that are like, oh yeah, well, I don't like abuse. No, I hate abuse. Hate it.
Mhm.
And so for me, most of my clients are going through some kind of abuse. And it gets a little bit tricky because a lot of times we think, well, he didn't hit me or whatever, but there's so many different aspects of divorce, the emotional, the financial, the legal. I mean, it's rampant, and there's not one specific kind of like profile of person that is in that category. I mean, I have women that their husbands were very successful. They were very successful, multi 7-figure net worth, and there's still abuse happening. She can't go to the store without getting approval to make a purchase. She can only use credit cards and doesn't have cash or hasn't written a check it's absolutely awful. And this is the stuff behind the scenes that, people aren't necessarily talking about.
Yeah.
And then you add in the divorce aspect, and it just becomes even more difficult. So I think for me, that was really the key. And it's hard because again, I think a lot of the states that I work, and I'm obviously based here in Wisconsin, but I work all over the country. Some states are doing a better job of really, really starting to define abuse, more so than just, hey, they were hit or, pushed or whatever. There's just so much more to it.
Yeah. There's so many other levels than just physical.
Yeah.
Emotional, mental, financial. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see women make when it comes to navigating divorce? And what would you advise them to do in lieu of these things?
Yeah. So I would say some of the biggest challenges, a couple things. One is beating themselves up around not feeling like they didn't take ownership or interest in the finances. So that certainly can play into it.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of alluded to this, and that is the, impact on confidence. And usually that happens for a variety of different reasons. But I would say, really the formula for confidence is, knowledge plus experience. And if we have the knowledge without the experience, it's, theory. And if we have the experience without the knowledge, it's trial and error. But when we get those two things working together, it's really powerful. And so I think that would be the first thing is, there's a opportunity for women to be able to reconnect with their confidence. The other kind of mistake I see is a lot of times they'll say, well, Rhonda, I need to, find an attorney right away. And there's actually things that women can be doing behind the scenes before they actually even file. Like, looking for documents or organizing the financial information or trying to get a handle on expenses. Trying to just be aware. Like I always say, women become really good private investigators when they have to be. And so they can, all of a sudden they're like, Rhonda, I've never really had access to any of the financials, but oh, by the way, I found this statement, or, oh, by the way, I found, an old tax return, or, oh, I found this. What does this mean? And so there's just opportunities for them to be able to start kind of preparing before they actually file. And I think it really puts them in a good position because they can start to be more proactive than reactive. The divorce process in and of itself is very reactive, and not as proactive. And so I think, that's certainly part of it. And one of the other, things too, Kylie, is obviously fear. I mean, they're afraid. The biggest question is, am I going to be okay? And I'm like, or am I going to be fine? And I'm like, well, we have to define what that means for you. I can't tell you that until we get a little bit more information,
Yeah. You talk about being proactive versus reactive, and I've never heard of anyone having a quick and painless divorce. what would you say for anybody listening who's maybe considering making this decision? What kind of timeframes would you recommend they start to get things organized, or they start to, gain access to things that they don't have, maybe without calling suspicion or whatever? Like what would that timeline ideally look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will preface this by saying a lot of times the women that reach out will say, Ron, I've been thinking about this for years. 5 years, 10 years. I wish I would have done it sooner. And I'm like, well, we can't change that. So what can we do now? So I would say really a great timeline is probably about 6 months. And the offerings that I have for my company to be able to help women really are kind of tailored around that. So 6 months is a good period of time for women to start getting stuff organized. We can help them interview attorneys from our vetted list of preferred providers. We can help them do a lot of things behind the scenes before they're ready. So 6 months is kind of that window. Once we get too far out, like, oh, well, Ron, I want to, when my kids graduate 5 years from now, and I'm like, well, call me back, because by the time we get everything organized, it's going to be long, outdated, and things will have changed. So that's certainly, I think a kind of a good timeline.
6 months. Okay. Wow. Oh, that's just tough. That's tough.
Yeah.
So for anybody listening, whether or not they're considering divorce or that's something that they're going through, what are some things that we can do now to make sure that we're all individually taking care of our own financial wellness, divorce aside?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, we just have to be willing to lean into the conversation around money and ask questions. Mm-hmm. And, there are going to be times where people are probably going to say, kind of disregard the questions. But I think that's one of the most powerful things. Can you help me understand? Why is it this versus this?
Yeah.
So that's certainly one thing. Getting a good handle on the budget. I always say, budgeting is not sexy or glamorous, and nobody really likes to do it, but it's important. There's some really great apps out there. Obviously, the one that I have used for a long time is Mint, free, secure, all that. The one that I've been testing recently has been Rocket Money. And I actually really like it because it identifies expenses that you may want to negotiate. And so when I signed up for the service, there is a cost to it each month. But I signed up for the service, and the first month they were like, hey, you've got this like audio book that is somehow got purchased and is reoccurring. And I was like, wait a minute. And I don't know if it was one of my kids that did it, like, who knows?
Sure.
I was like, I don't remember this. Okay. So I challenged it, and we got it taken off, but it was like $10 a month that was running behind the scenes. I had no idea it was running.
Yeah.
So I think, there's certainly some of those things that you can simplify, to try to get a handle on some of those things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, make sure that you are seeing the tax returns. With things becoming electronic, it's very easy for one party to just e-sign the other party's name. I have clients that haven't seen a tax return in 10 years.
Ooh.
And the IRS isn't, coming after them. So clearly they're up to date from the IRS perspective as far as filings, but they haven't seen the taxes, which means they don't know what their spouse's income is. There's all kinds of stuff that could be, going on behind the scenes that they really don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. There's a way that they can actually get access to tax records if they feel like it's a little bit prickly or they don't want to rock the boat on asking for information. Like, hey, I can't really go to the CPA because, he's, he or she's kind of like, my husband, I feel like they're working with my husband more and whatever. So you can actually go to the IRS website and request a transcript, and you can do that under the radar. You don't have to have anybody just, get permission to do it. You just can request it. And then you can see, what's been going on. That's the first thing.
Interesting.
The second thing is they can also pull a Social Security statement for themselves to see what their earning history has been over, the last whatever their work time has been. So that's another way for them to get information. And then if anybody does have college age kids or people that are going to be going off to college and they're filling out the FAFSA form, things have gotten so much different and so much better since the days that I was in college 20 years ago. But the FAFSA form, you can actually fill out information and it will automatically pull in the tax information. So definitely less laborious than it was years ago. And
Yeah.
so I had a client who hadn't seen the tax returns for several years, and she was the one filling out the FAFSA form and put in the information around the taxes, and it auto-populated. And she was like, holy smokes, Rhonda. I felt like we had no money. And my husband's making a significant amount of money annually. And it was a game changer, for her.
Mm.
So I just think it's also, being aware. And to your point, you divide and conquer. At the end of the day, there's only so many hours in the day. One person usually does take the lead on the finances. It's just, life, right? But
Yeah.
just make sure that you have an awareness of what's going on, so that if something does happen, that you at least know where to be looking for the information that you need.
For sure. Yeah. That's interesting. That's a good call with the tax returns. There's so many different transactions, financial transactions we have all day, every day. But to go to that one specific place to kind of get all this information, especially if you're blinded by the other side of, your financial relationship, that's interesting. That's a good call.
Yeah.
Um, so for anybody listening who is navigating divorce right now, what do you want them to know?
That's a great question. I would say, first of all, you're not alone. I know they probably hear that a lot, but you're really not. A lot of times the things that they might be experiencing. So if you're experiencing like, okay, is this really how this goes? Or starting to second guess yourself or question, even just your clarity of thought, right? You're like, what is going on here? I feel like I'm losing my mind. You're not alone. That is a very kind of normal thing. And I think we a lot of times have turned off listening to our intuition and listening to what our gut's telling us. And we need to start listening to that. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing. And then, just keep in mind, the formula for financial confidence. It's, really knowledge plus experience that helps women navigate through, life decisions. And everything is, figure outable, right? I mean, we can always find the answers. We can always ask questions. It just might not be easy or simple or fast, but it certainly, is possible. And again, I know that you work a lot with women, entrepreneurs. And I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of women business owners, successful women business owners that I have worked with over the years that, they feel like, Rhonda, I should have my stuff together, or, hey, I'm running a business over here. I really don't know what's going on with the personal finances, or I'm, whatever. And it's something that we see all the time. And so it's just the preparation certainly is really, really important. And I think the last thing would be a lot of times women will say, well, Rhonda, I'm smart. I'm like, we don't need to debate this. Of course, there's no question. I have no question about that. It's just they need the guidance and the direction, the coaching, the analysis, right, to help them kind of walk step by step through the process of divorce so that they can come out of the other side, stronger and more empowered moving forward.
What are some of the biggest financial maybe surprises or challenges that people run into when they're navigating divorce? Like things are like, wow, didn't see that one coming. Wish I would have known about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple things that I have seen. One was we were actually in a mediation with a client. So I will actually attend mediation with my clients as a financial expert. And so we were in the room with the attorney. And usually in that case, the mediator is bopping back and forth in hopes to come to a resolution. And it became very clear during that meeting that some information had not been disclosed. And what we found out was that the life insurance that the spouse had, the wife, soon to be ex-wife, was not the beneficiary. And in fact, she never had been. So the beneficiary was his children, who were minors. So she felt like a total gut punch. And she said to me, Rhonda, what would have happened if he died? You wouldn't have gotten the money. Well,
Oh,
like
wow.
it was awful. And at that moment, right? Again, a lot of times people will not disclose all of the information that they're supposed to, and we don't have enough time to go into why all that happens, and it's just super frustrating.
Hmm.
But people think that people are going to be transparent. Hey, they're going to come to the table, they're going to disclose all their assets and liabilities, and we're going to know exactly what's going on. And that's not the case. They can withhold information, and how do we get it if they're not willing to give it to us? Well, there's some strategies that the attorneys can use, but it's a lot of work, and it can be expensive to do that sometimes. But this one, you kind of just, if you're married, right, you typically, we will see that the spouse is the beneficiary, but he had changed, perhaps never put her on in the first place. So that was really hard. The second story was, for women who maybe their spouse is the one who has owned a business or owns businesses. They might both own businesses. They might be in
Hmm.
business together, but one party actually has kind of like these side things going on. So we actually work with a private investigator out of New York to help us find hidden assets. And it's super
Oh,
fascinating and really, it's just awesome. I spent a long time trying to find him, and so we work very closely with him. But I have a client in California, and her husband had 3 businesses that she knew about. But we did an asset search because she felt like there were potentially some other things that she wasn't aware of. And the asset search came back and showed that he actually had 3 additional businesses that he had set up and transferred ownership to one of his female business partners, and that he was still, part owner of these companies. But we would have no way of knowing that, if we hadn't done the asset search.
wow.
So it's pretty difficult. And I don't think that you're ever truly prepared. It's a whole new level of feeling feeling like they've been trust has been broken, and that,
Yeah,
somebody has
betrayal.
betrayed them.
Yeah.
Um it's really hard. So yeah, even, it's always I get the report, and I go through it with my clients because I feel like, just send the report over and have them look at it. I want them to, like, we can talk through it,
Yeah.
and sometimes you end up with more questions than answers, or you get clues of things that then you can turn around and have the attorneys ask. But, had we not done that, we would have no idea what was really going on. I mean, properties or businesses or trusts that were set up. I mean, it's really crazy.
Yeah.
And people often only disclose what they want people to know. So it really puts women, that's why this is so challenging, is because if we don't have a clear picture of the entire picture of the assets and liabilities, there is exposed risk for women. And, the stats show us that women's lifestyle typically goes down 41% after the divorce is over. And I fully believe that part of
Mhm.
that is 2 things. One, not truly having transparency on what's available that should be considered as part of the negotiations. And the second component to that is not knowing how to negotiate. I think that's
Mm,
one area that women really haven't necessarily had the experience or don't feel confident doing. And it's a huge part of the divorce process.
yeah.
Huge part. And it doesn't have to be nasty, but like you have to be able to set the boundaries and have clear expectations and communicate very clearly, and I have a process that'll take people through with that. Like, and I'll just share it really quick if we have just a moment, because I think
Yeah.
it's really
Go for it.
helpful. And people can use this, of course, not just for divorce negotiations, but for, working with strategic partners, or, for salary or whatever. And it's something that I have used probably for 10 years, and it's been very helpful. So the acronym is ANOT, ANOT. And it's just a way for us to tee up to how to initiate having that negotiation type conversation. It could also be, hey, somebody's inviting you to be part of a nonprofit board, and you want to make sure that you have clarity on really what's being asked of you. So the
Yeah.
first one is acknowledge, hey, thank you so much for a genuine, wholehearted, just real something simple of gratitude that sounds like you. Hey, I'm grateful we could at least have this conversation. I'm grateful we could have the conversation, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's sometimes can be tricky in those situations because they're heated and emotional, but just what's one thing you could be grateful for? And we lead with that.
Mhm.
The N is naturally, comma, I, right? So we always just kind of like kind of like handling objections up first, just address the elephant in the room. Here's what I'm all about. Naturally, I want to make sure that I can navigate through this process, as smoothly as possible. Obviously, you are concerned about, and then fill in the blank, right? And then the T is the ask. What are you asking for? And sometimes, I think a lot of times we think, well, if we're going to be negotiating, we just got to come and ask for the big stuff right away. But sometimes it's as simple as teeing it up around, the process that they're going to consider using for divorce. Like, hey, I'm glad we could have this conversation. Naturally, I want to make sure that we can do this in the seamless way, the most seamless, cost-effective way possible. Obviously, you're concerned about wanting to keep the house, and I know that you're blah blah blah. And then the ask could be, hey, can we have a conversation around, just what process we want to use for the divorce process? Or can we have a conversation around, the whole picture before we try to make a decision? Or, whatever, like it doesn't always have to be about dollars and cents.
Yeah.
And I also encourage my clients to use it with their attorneys, because a lot of times the attorneys will say in their agreements, well, we respond within 24 hours. A week goes by, 2 weeks goes by, and they don't hear with them. And it's like, hey, you know what? I'm glad we can work together. Naturally, I'm feeling, anxious because I haven't been through this process before. Obviously, you've got a lot of clients, and I know you're overwhelmed, which again, like that to me is no excuse, but okay. And then the ask is, hey, you know what? I know in your agreement you said that you respond within 24 hours. Could we revisit that actually happens, because it would help reduce my anxiety and blah blah blah. Like that's how we tee it up. And it's been really, really helpful. And I've had several clients who have gotten raises as a result of using that format. I think it's just because we avoid it because we don't know how to start the conversation. And it's like, we just either like avoid it, or we say it really fast and then run out, or we say things that we wish we would have said differently. And so it just gives people kind of a track to run on as they're kind of thinking through how to approach that.
No, I love that. ANOT. I love that. I have a similar but different acronym that I shared like years ago, but I never got a really good acronym out of it, which now it's comical because it's so bad. But it was like how to handle like difficult client requests. And it was a FOIT, which is a fake word. It's not real. But it was A, acknowledge, like everybody just wants to be heard, right? F, state the facts. Like this is just what it is. No emotion, right? O, state your options. Like here are the different ways that we could potentially go forward here. I, this is the impact of, whatever is decided here. C is the call to action. Like this is what I need from you in order to make these things happen. And then the last one was H, humility. Like at the end of the day, like if I've misunderstood anything that, you've said here, please just let me know, didn't mean to, whatever it was, humility. But it was such a terrible acronym. But I love that they both start with A and acknowledge. And, you're working your way through like, this is what I am hearing. This is what I can offer, so similar, but I like the ANOT. I mean, I think, yeah, you're right. You can use that in probably everyday conversations more than you even realize. So that's a great framework to start those difficult conversations for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I love acronyms. I love them. It's just great. I think they're easy to remember, and we can, we get comfortable using those in situations that otherwise might be kind of stressful. So we can think clearly and have a plan.
Yeah. Have a plan, right? That's the plan. That's the plan, to have a plan.
Have a plan.
Rhonda, for anybody listening and wants to learn more about you and the work that you do, where can they learn more? How can they contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's probably the main option would be my website, WFWC, so Women's Financial Wellness Center, WFWCdivorce.com. I do have a podcast as well called Divorce Conversations for Women. So they can check that out, published articles and stuff that they can check out as well for free. And then if they'd like to take the quiz, which is, hey, I'm kind of contemplating this, I want to know what my next best move is, they can take our next best move quiz that's also available on the website.
Nice. There you go. For anybody listening who's enjoyed this conversation, please go ahead and leave a review wherever you are listening. And Rhonda, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom, especially on such a a challenging topic. Much appreciated. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
To continue learning how to better build your business and make your vision a reality, subscribe to the Welcome to Eloma email list at welcometoeloma.com.